Welcome into the podcast, Striker Texas MLS Podcast. We're back, but I don't know what the name of the show is. That's not actually new. I never really know exactly what's going on, but we're here to talk about the three MLS teams in the great state of Texas. Austin FC losing, Dallas losing, Houston
Not
drawing,
losing.
but despite that, they slip into the bottom two of the table. Austin and Dallas stay in the top three. 7-2, the aggregate score. Not a great weekend for the Texas MLS teams. We're here to break it all down. I'm John Arnold in Nashville still, where FC Dallas suffered at the hands of Hani Mukhtar and the boys in yellow and blue, I think they call them, gold and blue. Chris Bills is back in Austin wearing the Pepe jersey, wearing his talisman cap. Swag, I'm sure we'll hear about that at the end of the show. And the best thing that we ate and talking about shop down some local businesses. And Victor Riza is down in Houston. Let's start. First of all, of course, you need to know that if you are interested in any of these stories, you're interested in what we're talking about on the podcast, make sure you check out the Striker. That's where our deeper insight goes. That's where everything that we write about these teams shows up. Good, bad, ugly, beautiful. It's all on the Striker. Check it out, striker.com. Let's start in Austin, Chris. Austin does lose to Minnesota United. A bit of a back and forth game. There is a chance, I think, for Austin to win this game, and that's why I want to start with your takeaways, including what one moment might be that might come back to haunt Austin, or something that you think is maybe the time that got away.
Yeah, I mean it's Julio Cascante's mistake in the second half that leads directly to Franco Fragipane's goal. Austin, it's not nothing new. Austin passing out of the back against heavy pressure from Minnesota United. Too much space between Austin FC players. They went back twice, as Joshua pointed out. They had already kind of gotten out of pressure and they kind of put themselves back into pressure. And Julio Cascante didn't feel Franco Fragapane coming as quickly as he did. He pokes the ball away, easy, one touch, chips it over Brad Stuver, nice little finish, but that's way too easy. When you have possession and all of a sudden the ball ends up in the back of your own net, and it's something we've seen from Austin, but particularly I think Julio Cascante. He raised his hand after this one. You can read. In my my second day piece, that just the he took the credit, or he took the blame for the loss, and I'm not sure that's like always. It's a 90-minute match. It's never entirely fair to put it on one person, but it's been too many matches where he's had to raise his hand and say, "Yeah, I'll take this one, guys." And he had such a. The other thing is, he had such. Yeah.
Well, I think he has been better this season than last season, and I also think that like Gabrielson, that was their big defensive signing. I think like the weakness of this team is still clear, and I think when you're looking and look, like Austin is in the luxurious spot of being able to say, yeah, when we get to the playoffs, right? They don't have the X by their name, they're not clinched, but everyone knows this team is going to play in the postseason for the first time in its history. That's exciting. That's good. It speaks to the rebuild that they've had. It speaks to how good Josh Wolf has been. I think the glaring weakness of this team, and the thing that can absolutely undo you in a one-game playoff situation, to me, is still that center back situation and the absolute lack of depth there.
Yeah, no, it's fair. I think that the one thing I was talking to both Cascante and Ruben Gabrielson about after this was actually their best 90-minute performance, I think, other than maybe the Kansas City match a few weeks ago in Kansas City. This is their best 90-minute performance in over a month. And they had the one moment. And I think, though, what stood out from this match to me is it did feel, what you're saying is, one game scenario. This felt like the type of game that ends your season. You're not quite clicking offensively. The ball's not moving fast enough. You're not creating the chances you normally create. This is the first game since May 8th that Austin failed to score a non-penalty goal. And you can say, you give up 2 goals on the road, you're liable to lose. But Austin's been scoring at least 3, right? And I think that's the part that it just wasn't quite clicking. It wasn't quite good enough, and you've got to find other ways to win ugly matches other than just outscoring your opponents. And I think the good thing is, on the back end of this, Emiliano Rigoni in town. He's the piece that they probably needed in this one. Somebody who can actually come in and change a game. The subs The subs were Rodney Redis, Owen Wolf, Felipe Martins, guys that have put in shifts, helped close out matches, but they're not really going to chase a game for you. Denny Hosen was the other sub. And we can talk a little bit about Maxi Arruti. Sounds like he's maybe carrying a bit of a knock and hasn't quite been up to the form that we came to expect from him early in the season. Can he get that back? Is it time to give Danny Hosen a start? Those are all things that are kind of floating around. And, it's crazy to have so many question marks around a team that's still second in the Western Conference, third in the Supporters Shield race. And, they're really punching above their weight, but can they reach another gear before playoffs start? Because I think they're going to need to.
I have a question on this one. So we kind of knew we saw with Houston last year. We've seen it over the years, what Maxi Arruti can bring, right? This is his typical season, right? Strong start.
Sure.
Should Austin have gone and bought a 9? Was Rigoni the right need?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I think that the thing with Austin is that right now, as long as you've got Moussa Jite and Danny Hosen on the roster, taking up, what are you're going to add a fourth center forward to the
but none of them have
roster
to be the number
and
one.
The other thing is that Rigoni can play the 9. I do wonder as we get into this final stretch, unless he's going to take over that starting role from Ethan Finley, which I haven't ruled out, but there's only 8 games left now in the regular season. He's going to be a super sub, and I think you can kind of use him however fits best in the moment. And the other thing is Danny Hosen, I think, has shown in 270 minutes he's scored 3 goals and has looked effective. Maybe you give him a start. I'm not saying you start him against LAFC. They might have to if Maxi Arruti can't go, but they've got another midweek match coming up against Portland. I think it's time to give Danny Hosen some run because he's a good enough player. And he's shown it in his time in the league. He just hasn't been, quite good enough to get those moments in Austin. And I think it's time for a change of pace. It's time to give, the guys that you do have on the roster a chance. I hear what you're saying, Victor. I just think that they filled the need that they went out and got the best player that they could. And
yeah, I mean, I think it was good work considering the situation, right? Like when you look at why this DP spot needed to be opened kind of late, why you had to get him in at this time. I think they did good work. I just wonder, Jite, even picking Hosen in the expansion draft, whether he's going to be helpful, whether he starts or not. I think that's something to absolutely keep an eye on. There were some, and look, no one builds a perfect team. I'm not saying like Claudio Reyna, how dare you? Right. I just think like those are the sort of like misses that have sort of put the team in this situation, right?
And that's the point that I was sort of trying to make. If you'll allow me one more thing on this on Rodney Redis, a little bit. Okay. Right. Rodney Redis comes into this match. He makes a couple nice hustle plays as you come to expect from him. Then he does like 3 step overs and falls over on the pitch. And Austin fans, are gonna criticize, right? And that's part of soccer. I think that what gets missed when Rodney Redis comes into the match is that like there was nobody else in that moment to fill that spot because Washington Caruso is out injured with a hip injury. And that's what this team is dealing with right now. My point wasn't necessarily, hey, stop, dumping on Rodney Redis. It's like, hey, look around, look at, how far this roster still has to come to be a legitimate MLS Cup contender, in my opinion, because there's still too many pieces on the senior roster, like Rodney Redis, like Johan Romagna, not to single guys out, but there's guys that, that they thought would play bigger roles. Moussa Jite is another one of those guys that they thought would play bigger roles that are taking up valuable space on the roster. And this is a second-year franchise still. I think that, if this team peters out at the end of the season, it won't be a surprise. I still think that they can continue the kind of the magic run that they've been on, but there's got to be major work done on this roster during the offseason. And, you still got to get that academy built up to the point where you have other guys pushing some of these guys that have been poor. So
to be fair to Austin, I feel like they are in that process. It's a process that you're
exactly
on the Striker. Yeah. Speaking of MLS Cup candidates, LAFC visits in 4 days, Friday, 7 p.m. I'm excited for that one. I'm excited for this Friday MLS slate. Listen, like there's going to be some meat on the grill. There might be a couple beverages consumed because it's Austin FC, LAFC, and then Cascadia at Portland's place, Portland Timbers and Seattle Sounders. Oof, it's going to be awesome. I'm looking forward to obviously reading Chris's coverage while I get a few drinks in.
And we'll have
Timbers, Sounders.
We'll have Benjamin Verhan in town too. He's coming over from LA, so we'll have full
Awesome.
full coverage of Austin LAFC.
Wall-to-wall coverage, no matter which colors you're wearing. Real quick, before we get to the Dynamo, Sebastian Driussi, man, he is like absolutely committed, and this time was a penalty, to not making the Golden Boot race a race. Like Hani Mukhtar jumps Jesus Ferreira in this game against FC Dallas, that we're going to get to at the end of the show, and like Driussi just keeps. He just keeps scoring. It seems like it's his to. I mean, it's definitely his to lose. It seems like he's got his eye on the thing. I don't know if the individual hardware will feel that nice if they do have this late season collapse that we're saying maybe this loss on the road hints at. Collapse might be a strong word, but it definitely seems like he's going to be the MVP. He's going to win the Golden Boot. Chris Driussi, unbelievably good this year.
Yeah, he's been so good, and even on a night like this, where I don't think I think he would admit he didn't have his best game. He looked like he rolled an ankle. Sometime in the first half, was maybe a step slower than normal. But when the moment comes, and Austin gets a penalty, you just trust that he's going to bury it, just like you trust when he's going to bury any chance he gets in the box, and that's what he's been doing all season for this team.
You say he admits he doesn't have his best game. When he has his best game, Austin FC wins, even against teams like Sporting Kansas City, right? It's for me, I was going to say I don't have a vote. I think I do have a vote and just never use it. Sorry, MLS communications people. I'll vote for Driussi.
All the Austin fans are going to start tweeting at John.
Please. The thing is, like, I don't feel like I watch more of the league than is healthy. Like I said, I'm going to be watching the game this weekend, but still, I feel like the league is so big. I'm just like, I don't know that I'm qualified to say who the best rookie was this year. I don't know, but we'll get into it.
A lot of games at this point.
A lot of games, man. I watch as much as I can. I'm a sicko. You guys know this. Everyone knows this. But anyway, we'll get into my personal award voting strategy a little later this year. Let's talk about the Dynamo. And Victor, it's a point. It's a point. It's an exciting game. Good number.
Well, I don't know if it was that exciting. It wasn't that exciting.
I mean,
maybe if you were there in person,
time equalizer.
Yeah, I think for the people that were there in person, it was a good takeaway to not come back
empty-handed.
Huh? But a couple, and I think they flew out some sweet holders. So I guess there you go, Houston Dynamo extended the olive branch, we can say. But no, look, this was a must-win. I think if they truly wanted to make this miracle playoff run, that's not going to happen. But you want to put yourself in contention. And Diego Rubio was out, so I mean, I think if you wanted to win against the Colorado Rapids at their place, that's a big break, lucky break on your end to have essentially their MVP out, a big piece of their creative attack. But even then, Colorado was kind of clicking on all cylinders when they wanted to move forward. Houston created very little. A lot of corners going Colorado way. Set pieces still proves to be a problem for Houston. That's the way that Colorado goal ends up coming in. But you could sort of see the trend when it was kind of going from, Acosta and finding Abubakar on the far post, and it was just eventually gonna go their way. And unless Houston did something different, and it did. Houston tried to be a little bit more proactive from the beginning, as they've tried in some of these recent games, especially on the road. Herrera obviously has been more active in the attack as his time with Houston has come. And I think part of it is because you're not getting the same output out of Quintero as you've been getting. Nearly surprised her in the early half, but honestly, I think we're still seeing Nagamura shift the lineup. It's been over 20 different starting lineups. Well, Corey Baird returns, those kind of moves, and ultimately, 3 points not taken away.
Look, I mean, I don't necessarily want to shovel dirt on the Dynamo coffin. I mean, I think looking at the table, they're not going to make the playoffs. I don't see any way. I think they're more than 10 points out of it right now with like.
But you want to see some progress, right? You want to see something.
Here's what I would say, and what I want to ask you. They Nagamura, his future kind of aside, if he's rolling along as the manager next season, you see Ache play in an even more advanced role than we've seen him play at times. You see some production from Sebastian Ferreira, some sort of attacking hints. What can people look forward to? What are the things that are maybe sort of hinting that this is, despite the fact that he's continuing to maneuver, that maybe he should have a established 11? Tactically, it seems like he's starting to try some things that are working or could work in 2023.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of been an experimental season the whole way, and I think down here people are just a bit upset that the goal stated was playoffs, and it doesn't seem like it's going to happen, right? But you're right. I think it is time to start looking to 2023, even though the club may not acknowledge it. Certainly, you got some pieces there that Ferreira and Herrera, obviously your two DPs. There's going to be some contract situations at the end of the season to settle. I think maybe without saying it, maybe this game was seeing some guys like Corey Bear return to a lineup is to see what they have to offer for next year, I would think. But Nagamura has made it clear that this isn't his roster. It's going to take some change in the offseason. They're going to need 2 or 3 more transfer windows, according to what he said a couple of weeks ago, to be able to be in the top spots in the Western Conference. So we'll see. Good news. There is a new face coming this week. Nelson Quillones, the late arrival from the summer transfer window, really the only summer transfer signing. If you don't count Herrera, but I guess we have to count Herrera. He's the big drum roll signing of the summer. So
he's
that's
only
part
the
of
most important player they signed in a decade. Should we count him? Should we not?
No.
But
He was a pre-contract signing back in February. I mean, can you really count him to the summer?
Well, I still say yes, but I understand what you're saying.
All right. Well, then you have 2 signings in the summer. I still think Houston wasn't proactive enough, but
yeah, totally fair.
This is the way we go.
They were, right? I mean, it looks like they absolutely.
Yeah, but I think to your point earlier, Victor, and I remember having this conversation, about all 3 Texas teams, but certainly about Houston last year, is like this is the time when guys play for their spots. And it seems like a lot of those guys stuck around last year, and a lot of that's probably because of the coaching change, because of the change in the front office. But do you feel like Pat Onstad, are they actually going to be proactive about turning this roster over? And how would you be watching this as a fan? Knowing that a lot of these guys are probably on their way out. Not that you want to kick them on the way out.
It'll be interesting to see, because it's not. I mean, it's also a rookie GM, right? As much as the memories come along with Pat Onstad and the championship memories, but it's also his first season. I think looking back, he might have made some mistakes, right? Maybe signing some guys before he had a head coach. The head coaching hire was also a late arrival, right? In January. There's some things they're going to look back on this season where they didn't get it right, and I think it is a question because we haven't seen much under Onstad. This is his first year. What is going to be the reaction? I still say the biggest thing too is what is going to be the reaction of the owner. How much patience is he going to have? How much is he going to say publicly about the current season? And I would imagine he has to say it's unacceptable, right? But also. He may not say anything at all, like the previous ownership when things went south. So ultimately, it's I think the biggest thing is locally, people are frustrated, right? I mean, it's been too many seasons now, no playoffs, no matter who's in charge.
Yeah, the team needs to look fundamentally different next year, right? I think Pat Onstad, with the experience he had at the Columbus Crew, it's kind of funny, like how many, Greg Berhalter is coaching the national team. Nico Estevez is going to get FC Dallas to the playoffs. We think Josh Wolf has Austin FC in the playoffs. Like a lot of the assistants are starting to become either hot commodities on the coaching market or already doing remarkable things on their own. I think like they're definitely were doing things the right way there. And now it seems like Onstad has this support from ownership. Like if the Dynamo don't look fundamentally different next year,
but the
cooler seats and the different design is not going to put butts in those seats in the stadium. They need to be better.
The thing that's fascinating to me about teams in this situation around the league right now is that there's just so many dang teams, and you all need the same thing. You need players with MLS experience that are going to come in and make an immediate impact on the locker room culture, and to be able to kind of shift things around. And what's your story that you're going to do? They? I
think like, the guys you have Tim Parker. You've got like I don't know. I mean, I understand that like maybe look. I'm coming and we'll get to the FC Dallas Nashville game. Nashville smoking FC Dallas. I'm not saying Nashville's not a good team, but when I was previewing the game for Nashville, I'm like, man, why is this team not better? Because you start to look at the roster and you say, I recognize all these names. They got Walker Zimmerman at center back. They got Joe Willis at goalkeeper. They got Dax McCarty at midfielder. They got CJ Sapong starting at forward. Teal Bunbury, when he's healthy, sometimes plays. Like they've got Alex Mule and Sean Day. It's like the MLS veteran all-star team, but they still need I mean, Hani, who was
Yeah,
unbelievable, as we'll get into, but you also need a little bit more than just, all right, it's a bunch of guys who know the league. And I think like the dynamo for me, yeah, maybe they do need one or two of those players, but I also think like with Steve Clark, with Tim Parker, who I thought, was
sure.
pretty solid against the Rapids, like maybe you already have enough of that core, and it's about making the right foreign signings, which they haven't done, right? I mean, I think all the Texas teams we could say like haven't necessarily. It's tough. It's way more difficult to scout. It's way more difficult to scout like the foreign market and figure out who's right for the team, who's actually going to work in MLS, who wants to come to MLS, who's going to be a good cultural fit. Like I think that's way tougher, and I think that to me,
And I guess the point I was making works on both of those types of signings is that what's the story that you're telling players? What's compelling about coming to this MLS club versus to going to any other MLS club? And that's where I think Houston still has to get that right. And there's plenty of things going for it, right? You're in a huge market in Houston. Right now you got Hector Herrera to play for and learn from. Sebastian Ferreira definitely looks like he's a rising talent. But can you compete in this world where there's 28, 29, 28 other clubs that are pushing for the same thing, right? And that's where I think some of these clubs continue to fall farther behind, and Houston needs to pull itself up those rungs. And I'm really interested to see if they can do it or not.
I think something that we're going to be asking Victor in the offseason is if Paulo Nakamura is the type of guy who creates that story, who conducts that orchestra. Because you look at we're saying, hey, they need to build a culture. They need to build something that people recognize, that people understand.
Well, they're pointing to Austin and Josh Wolf as an example of how in the second year things have worked out, but I still think they need that big attacking piece like a Driussi. And for example, too, Dallas has a new head coach this first year. They made the signings in the offseason, and look where they are, third in the Western Conference.
All right, John, you can't avoid talking about this FC Dallas loss any longer. What happened?
They got smoked, man. They got smoked. We talked a little bit after the game, Nico Estevez and I, and kind of his first thing he said was like, there's not that much to say when the other team is better than you. He said, Nashville was better than us today. And what more can you say? We did get into a little bit of analysis. And one of the fascinating things in that analysis was I asked him sort of, hey, why are we not able to stop Hani Mukhtar? He's unbelievable, but it seemed like the game plan you set out, if he's going to be the best player on the field for Nashville. He's going to be quite difficult to stop. Like, what was the plan and what didn't work? And he was like, what didn't work was the attack. Basically, Estevez felt like there was so little that Dallas offered going forward. And Dallas hasn't been in these games like Austin where it's 4-3 necessarily, but their attack has been a constant threat enough that I think teams have not felt comfortable just saying, let's go, let's do it, let's support numbers. Without Jesus Ferreira on the field, I think it was the worst attacking performance of the year for FC Dallas. And I think the numbers will back me up on that. I'm not sure what their XG ended up being. I'm not sure what the exact numbers were, but I think it'll be the lowest of the year because there were just so few clear-cut chances. And you could say, well, some of that could come down to game state. Mukhtar scores in the 5th minute, an unbelievable goal, tight angle, rooftop shot, crazy goal. And then they're up again. They're up 2-0 pretty quickly. But you would think that would lead to more FC Dallas chances. They did get caught out looking for the goal to cut the deficit in half on a counterattack that leads to the Hani Mukhtar free kick that he scores for his second goal. But ultimately, like as soon as that one goes in, it's 3-0. You're on the road. You already knew this was going to be a tough spot. FC Dallas certainly didn't give up, but Nico is kind of tossing the kitchen sink on at that point, right? We're going to read today. I'm going to write the story about Benny Redzik, rising, FC Dallas Academy project, who's 19 years old. When you see him for 45 minutes, something has gone wrong, right? Like he's a player that the club really likes. He's a player that Nico Estevez wants to give more opportunities to. But when the opportunity is, we're down 3-0, see if you can make something happen. See if you can run at these guys for a little bit. What can you say? I mean, I think Estevez said it well by saying Nashville was better. But I will say, Victor, like this is a game where FC Dallas always felt like it was going to be difficult with Jesus Ferreira suspended. I wrote in the buildup about how dependent this team has become on Ferreira and how much of a star he is. It could be a little concerning, but at the same time, you get him back Saturday for Real Salt Lake. If you win that game, you're still in third place in the league. You're still looking good points per game. You still could host a playoff game. So,
and it wasn't Right, but you also got to kind of, in far as this week, count that 1-0 win earlier in the week against Philadelphia, right? I mean,
That's the other thing is I
that
think there was so much energy spent there were 3 games in 7 days for FCD. They won, or I guess 3 games in 8 days. They beat the crud out of the Earthquakes 4-1. They beat a really good Philadelphia team 1-0. And I think, like, you saw Sebastian Lletget rest. You saw, some of the guys definitely are carrying something in their legs. So I think it's a great point, Victor, that, hey, this wasn't a fresh team, right, going up against Nashville. So
it sounds like a Gary Smith special, right? If you've got to stretch this team out, otherwise, if you give them an early lead, they're just going to sit back, and that does not play into FC Dallas's hands. Are they too reliant on the counterattack at this point, or is it just, like you said, just guys being out?
I don't know about the counterattack. I think, like, if they don't get the transition opportunities, then they have a big difficulty finding attack. And I think, Alan Velasco has really had a good month. He's had a very strong August, but I think, he's still trying to create a lot of times individually when he's frustrated, when they're down 2 goals, 3 goals. He's just trying to make this moment of magic happen. And he has made the moments of magic happen now and then, but I think he's still sort of getting adjusted, getting acclimated to the league, to his teammates. And even though he has a really good bond with Franco Jara off the field as this sort of like veteran Argentine who Alan Velasco has wanted to learn from, I think on the field, you definitely saw that Franco Jara, Dallas's attack is so good with Jesus Ferreira because of the way he's able to drop into space, but then so quickly go from, making the first pass in a 10-pass move to being the last man and being in the box. Jara is either sort of fixed to the box or he comes back to help, but then the attack is down a person because he's not quick enough to get into the box in that transition moment where FC Dallas is so good. I definitely think that, are they too dependent on Jesus? Are they too dependent on transition moments? I think ultimately FC Dallas sort of has created an identity. They have found what they're good at, and they often are able to maximize that on the field. Are they overly dependent? Yeah. Probably. Just like I think Nashville is too dependent on Hani Mukhtar, but when it works, right? And so I think, FC Dallas and Nico Esteves' first year with the moves that they've made this season, there's going to be some games like this. Like, there's going to be some times where it's rough, and it also shows a lack of depth. I've been a sort of a Franco Jara defender. This was really, really bad. I mean, this was the moment you knew all week you were going to play, and it just wasn't there. Just didn't do it. I mean, even me, like I said, I'm a Jara defender, but I'm not saying, re-sign the guy or anything like that. They got to figure out what they're doing this offseason because he comes off the books, but if I'm not mistaken, it's in the summer. So
I'm feeling, John, this makes me sad because I'm feeling a little bit of wind come out of my sails in this Austin versus FC Dallas, like Western Conference semifinal or final dream that I have. Just because it seems like teams like Nashville and Minnesota are charging. We get this, this proof that, they prove it against Dallas and Austin this weekend. And, it's just like, is the magic going to run out on these teams? Yeah. I hope it does. I hope it doesn't, but I feel like a little bit of the wind is out of my sails right now.
I still
pick me up.
I think both teams get home playoff games.
Yep.
Right.
And they're really good at home. So it could still happen, but yeah, the bracket might not work out, but if it does, we'll have it covered like crazy on the Striker. Chris, you basically live in Minnesota now. What's the best thing you ate this weekend or last week or whatever, man?
I had a great weekend. My buddy Matt Nielsen, who I kind of finally got a hold of right as I was pretty much flying into town. He's like, "Why don't you come up? I'm staying up at this Mille Lacs Lake, which is like 2 hours north of the city. So I get up there Thursday night. We go, have a good time. And then Friday we're playing golf with a couple of his friends. One of them has a lake house up on Mille Lacs. And so we just went over there and he made a steak, and it was from actually Austin, Minnesota. Which it was, those jokes were going back and forth all night of like, no, this is the real Austin, but this was the best steak I think I've had certainly all year. It was delicious. So that's the best thing I ate, and it costed me nothing. So that was the best part of the whole thing. Shout out to Rob from Austin, Minnesota. your steaks are better than any I've had in Austin, Texas. So
that was a great save, man. I was about to roast you for saying costed, and then you were able to work it out, so it still made grammatical sense in a sentence. I went over to Dino's Bar and Grill, or Dino's Bar in Nashville, dirty East Nashville.
It's not Dino's?
I don't think it's Dino's. People were responding. I tweeted about it, which is it's a little rare for me, but the receipt said Arnold, John, which is my Twitter handle. People don't already follow on the microblogging platform. So I thought that was funny. I tweeted it, and then I was like, I'll give Dino's a shout out. The burger is still amazing. It's the first time I've been there in the day. I didn't even know they're open in the day. It's like it's a dive bar. They're open till 3 a.m. most nights. So I've been there in the past to have a late night cheeseburger, but I had a early afternoon cheeseburger. Still is good. So shout out Dino's in Nashville, a great place. Victor, you doing any eating this weekend?
Yeah, I had some good homemade pozole.
Gosh.
Better than you'll find anywhere else.
You can tell we're back. Victor's giving recipe recommendations that no one's ever going to be able to achieve. Will Texas teams be able to achieve their goals? We'll talk about it on the Striker. You can check it out. Please subscribe. Please give it a look. It helps us do what we do here, but also bring you the coverage of teams from the road. Crazy times coming. 6 games left for FC Dallas. I think 7 for Austin, including that big one against LAFC. We're going to have all sorts of coverage this weekend on Friday. And we're not forgetting about the Dynamo. We're going to talk about them until they're eliminated from the playoffs. And then once that happens, we'll talk about their 2023. Got coverage of LA teams, Atlanta teams, women's soccer. It's all on the Striker. Hope you join us over there. Until then, we'll talk to you next week on the Striker Texas MLS Podcast.